All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sydney Diedrich, and I'm the marketing manager here at NewCloud, an Ottawa company. I want to thank you all for attending the webinar on ransomware preparedness and recovery, brought to you by NewCloud and Veeam. Today, you're going to hear from myself, as well as Michael Damer, a Veeam Solutions Engineer. And if at any point during the webinar you have a question, please feel free to use the question feature on your screen, and we'll address all those questions at the end. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. So to kick things off, I wanted to take a moment to really hit home a few of the realities of what companies are facing when it comes to ransomware. And the truth is that we as humans tend to belittle the likelihood of an event occurring. We hear about ransomware attacks on the news, but we never think that it'll happen to us. And the reality is that ransomware attacks actually occur about every 11 seconds, according to Cybersecurity Ventures. And this same statistic last year was every 14 seconds. So what we know is that ransomware attacks are becoming more and more frequent out there in our space. We also know that downtime is a really bad word for most companies, right? It means loss of revenue, lost reputation, data loss, etc. And Coveware actually tells us that when a company is hit by ransomware, the average downtime that they experience is around 21 days. So if you take a moment to think about that for your individual business and what 1 day of downtime means to you, picture that times 20, and you'll have kind of an idea of what an average ransomware attack is impacting businesses. Over the past year and a half, hackers have taken advantage of the uncertainties around COVID-19 to infect businesses with ransomware. And while no one industry is excluded, verticals like healthcare and financial services have been especially at risk due to the sensitive data that they handle. And for these businesses, hackers know that downtime means loss of life, loss of funds, and they're more likely to get payment faster. In fact, attack on healthcare companies is expected to quadruple as we go into the new year. And so I want you to take a moment, ask yourself this, what proactive methods do you guys have in place to prevent yourself from being throttled by a ransomware attack? How confident are you in your ability to stop an attack? And if you can't stop it, how confident are you in your ability to recover? So according to Malwarebytes, only about 37% of businesses are confident that they can stop a ransomware attack. And in reality, no one out there is immune from these threats. We're no longer using the term, if we're hit by a ransomware attack, it's when. So when you are hit by a ransomware attack, how will your company respond? Essentially, what we're trying to communicate with you guys today in this webinar is that you can no longer afford to be unprepared. So to put this into perspective, I want to take a look at a real-world example. Back in May of 2019, the city of Baltimore was hit by a new strain of ransomware called Robinhood. We're using the city of Baltimore as an example here because we have the data now that enough time has passed to really understand the impact of the attack. It takes a long time for the companies to gather the information on what the actual cost and damage that they experienced was from a ransomware attack. So the city of Baltimore will give us a holistic view here. So they were hit by Robinhood. All servers, with the exception of essential services, were taken offline, and a ransom totaling around $76,000 was demanded. The city did not regain full functionality for over a month. And since that attack, it pumped over $10 million into remediation and recovery and the hardening of their IT environment. Meanwhile, the estimated loss in revenue and other damages in the aftermath of the attack is totaled around $8.2 million, bringing the total cost of the ransomware attack on the city of Baltimore to be $18.2 million. So what happens when we face an attack? What are the costs? There's always the monetary costs associated with attacks, which, we just covered those: lost revenue due to downtime, customer attrition, retribution to affected parties. And some of those numbers you can see listed here. But there's also the non-monetary costs that we may not think about, like damaged reputation, And we don't want your company to become a part of the loss statistics, right? We want to help you prepare in order to minimize these costs as much as possible. And I said it earlier, it's inevitable that we'll face an attack at this point, right? Ransomware attacks are happening every 11 seconds, but proactively preparing can dramatically reduce the impact of an attack. And what we're seeing here, these are some statistics brought to us by Veeam. 96% of Veeam customers cut their ransomware recovery costs under $5,000, while 76% of customers using Veeam have had to spend nothing at all when faced with a ransomware attack. So again, underscoring the fact that being proactively prepared can be the difference between an $84,000 bill and a $5,000 bill, or nothing at all. And with that, I want to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague over at Veeam, Michael Deemer. Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Deemer, Systems Engineer here for Veeam Software. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in the IT world for almost nearly a decade now, really proficient in hardware and the software side of things. And I also used to be an MSP admin, so I really understand a lot of this, what really goes on underneath the hood here. So what I really want to dive into first is kind of the big picture. So Sydney already kind of talked about some of these monetary costs, right? These downtime numbers, and then more importantly, that brand reputation. I think that is huge, and that is something that you really just can't put in a statistic. It's something that it's so far and so spread that it's just really hard to put a monetary value on it. But brand diminishing is honestly one of the biggest things out there I think of, next to actually getting hit with ransomware. Now let's actually talk about this. Is what is ransomware? So some of you guys may know and some of you guys may not, but ransomware basically is a malicious software that spreads through cryptobiology. Now, it doesn't only spread through that way. There's SMS texting. There's a couple other big ways like Trojan horses and a lot of email correspondence and leaked infrastructures or weak infrastructures is a good one for where these particular ransomwares or exploits really come from. Now, the big thing around ransomware is it operates under the assumption that the data that they get is important enough to the end users or the company that they're willing to pay the ransom. Now, most of the time, I would say a majority of the time, that's 100% accurate. You have a business, you're collecting data, you're collecting these emails, you're building your company, right? So having that kind of data is absolutely mission critical to make sure that you have your daily operational needs. And more than that, you guys got to make ROI. So a lot of that data is actually how you make your money. Now, what does it really do? So, of course, it operates under the assumption that the data itself is something that you'll pay for. But what it does is it actually encrypts and holds the data ransom. Now, a lot of times they'll ask for different ways of payment, but there's a lot of different things that they can ask for, at least for payment-wise. And really, the other biggest thing that they threaten with is the leak of sensitive information. So you'll see this in a lot of the news headlines. Hey, X, Y, and Z, insert whatever big company out there, got hit with ransomware, and they leaked how much the CTO or the CFO or the CISOs made, and that's very private information they want to keep, so that way, there's not a lot of competitiveness. There's that kind of goes on in the marketplace as well. So it's not just one particular avenue. There's a bunch of different verticals there. All right, so let's kind of talk about everyone, every sector, and really every vertical is really at risk here. So it doesn't matter if you're using higher ed or you're in manufacturing, telecom, energy sector, the finance sector, right? There's a bunch of stuff here that's really at play. Now, just kind of going back here just a tiny bit for healthcare, right? They're always improving patient outcomes with protecting highly sensitive data. Like, just imagine how much data you give when you go to the hospital or the urgent care. All of that information, of course, is protected by HIPAA, but making sure that that particular hospital is HIPAA compliant is not necessarily your job, it's somebody else's, but they need to be able to make sure that they're ransom-proof, so that way your data is not just sitting out there on the black market. Now, same thing with manufacturing here. Manufacturing actually has to protect on really two fronts, where intellectual properties is always getting hit. There's always that particular side of the house. And then the other one is the logistical nightmare. Just as of today, I think I've seen a headline. I think there's like 75 cruise ships or cargo ships sitting out in the Bay of California waiting to be offloaded. So there's a lot of different things here. And then higher education, retail. So retail, of course, is making sure that your registers go up in Ring and making sure that we can minimize downtime. So when they come up, they swipe their card in and out. They got some good ROI there. Telecom, oil and gas. These all. It doesn't really matter really what vertical you're in. It's all going to be the same thing. It's really making sure that we have a way to protect and prevent against that particular ransomware. Now, let's also talk about some common infection approaches. So I kind of hinted to this a little bit earlier. So I'm going to kind of go over this and just really lightly here. So let me go back. So let me talk about, why is that not what I did? Okay, there. All right, so some of these common infection approaches. So really, what are they? So the biggest one is your email attack vector, which is called Trojans. Basically, this is email attachments, or clicking this link to sign up, or you won your free vacation, or do you want to talk to time with the CFO? You see a lot of that coming out. Another one that I see, or at least there's been a study done by Google and 2 universities about removable media. And what they found was the USB sticks that are dropped in public triggered human curiosity. And that's something that's very normal. Human curiosity always kills the cat, right? 49% of those USB bait strips or USBs were actually plugged in, and that's huge, and plugged into somebody's computer. So I just want to kind of make a note here. I would say a majority of that 49% of people thought that it might have been a ton of Bitcoin on there. It could have been some highly classified documentation, whatever that may be. Right? They always are very curious, and even myself, I probably would have picked up the bait and put the USB into my computer. But here's the difference between an average user and an advanced user. An advanced user is going to be able to put that in a sandbox, making sure there's no vSwitch access to the outside, and we're going to be able to build a virtual machine to unpackage that information to really understand it at a granular level first, before just letting the exploit run. Where a lot of times, and I would say a majority of the time, that the studies found is they're just plugging it into a laptop and hoping for the best. They're not really thinking of security protocols. It's just, hey, let's just see if there's $1 million on there, and we'll kind of go at it. Now, the last couple 3 here is this is something that you'll see definitely more throughout the end of the year, especially coming around the holiday season, is malvertising. So malvertising is actually probably one of the most, I wouldn't say the most, but it's a slicker way for ransomware actors to get in, because what they do is really they compromise weak infrastructure for online ad networks. And what that means is insert your big box store, whatever one you want to put out there. These legitimate ad, or at least legitimate websites, basically what they do is they compromise the URL link, and basically when they click on the link, the users are either tricked to download malware or taken to a completely different site that looks legitimate, like again, insert big box store, whatever that may be. It's going to look like a legitimate website, but really what they're doing is collecting your data, trying to resell it on the black market. Now, something like this is social media or SMS. I see this a lot. Honestly, I think I just got hit with, not like I actually got hit with ransomware, but I got an SMS ransomware chain delivered. And you'll see this a lot. It's usually a big group of like individuals. And what I mean by that is usually it's the same zip code, same type of phone carrier type of a situation, and they want you to click on some type of Java link. And that's usually how they get you, is this one click, really fast install link, and then that install link really just phones home to a ransomware server, which then therefore brings that exploit down to that local device. Now, something that I've really seen on the rise is this ransomware as a service. So ransomware as a service, it's really called, and I like to kind of put it like dummies for ransomware. So you don't have to be a black hat anymore. You don't really have to know all these different forms and fashions about command line and Linux code and making sure that you know Java and C++ and really understanding the algorithm itself. You could be Joe Smo with a couple $100 and find a ransomware as a service website and go out and start to target particular victims out there. So it doesn't necessarily mean when you get hit by ransomware it's some black hat that's actually doing it. It could just be somebody out there that's using ransomware as a service. So and I do want to say that I do talk a lot about Windows being the attack vector, but that doesn't always leave Windows as the only OS out there that gets hit with ransomware. Now, is it the majority of one? Yeah, I would say so, because I would say the U.S. workforce, and even abroad, the workforce in general is usually Windows-based of some kind. Of course, there's always Linux and Mac spread on there, but they're just not as high as a capacity in the market as they are for Windows. But that doesn't mean that those OSs are completely bulletproof, right? For Linux, everybody talks about like Ubuntu, Red Hat, and all the other distros, but Linux still has a particular ransomware as well, and that's called Linux kill disk. And once you get this, it's the Linux kill disk is basically a ransomware message that basically just tells you, hey, you've been infected. How do you want to do this? And how do you want to pay? And the same thing with file decoder on the Mac OS. It's the same type of thing. You're going to get some type of abbreviated meshes and tells you, hey, we accept credit cards, Western Union, PayPal, and Bitcoin, right? And a lot of times, and most of the time, even if you pay the ransom, it doesn't necessarily mean that, one, you're going to get your data back, and two, that they're not going to leak it. So just something to kind of note out there, guys. And let's see here. So the other big thing that I want to talk about is, okay, so this is actually a cool feature. So let's actually talk about what it looks like if you were sitting at your desk and you got an email from Microsoft. So you see this email and you're like, well, cool, I got this new email. Everything looks legit, has a Microsoft header, and it's called Anti-Spam Pro. And nobody likes spam emails, including myself. So I would read it over. It looks pretty good. There's no like really big grammatical errors. The Microsoft is spelled right. You know, you're really looking through this and it really looks like it potentially came from Microsoft. And hey, maybe you're on one of their featured partners and you get updates bi-weekly or their newsletter. So this just looks like another newsletter coming out from Microsoft, and you're like, well, you know what? Who cares? I don't want I don't like spam messages. Why don't I just go and follow this particular link and see what happens? And let's kind of pretend like we did that, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is an auth token. So this auth token is going to look like this. So if you read down the list here, it's going to give you it's going to give that particular person or actor access to access your data at any time, right? And a lot of times this particular message, and I'm even guilty of it myself, is sometimes you'll see this and you just immediately press accept, but you don't actually look at the terms and conditions. In this particular case, they have access in your data at any time, sign in as you. And the most important one is read and write access to your mail. So what does that really mean and what does that boil down to is admin level access to your mailbox. And so as soon as you give that accept, what happens on the back end? So if that phone's home, and then malware or that particular exploit is now going to start encrypting those particular objects. Now, once those objects have been encrypted, let's just say you go to lunch. You're like, I'm just going to let the Anti-Spam Pro install, do its thing, and it said it was updating my computer. No worry. So let's just pretend you're Sally from HR. You see this, you're like, maybe it's just me, or maybe I just didn't put on my glasses. Something funny is going on. I'm going to close Outlook and just hopefully it all comes back. It said infected, but maybe Outlook's just messing up. And once you figure that out, you're like, you reboot the machine, and Sally from HR comes back and says, hey, all my emails are saying encrypted. What is the next biggest step that particular exploit is going to do? And that's really going to be, hey, we accept some type of payment. And it's going to be in a plain English, right? Whatever, especially whatever region you're in is going to be in that particular dialect, I should say. And then what's going to happen? It's going to say, hey, this is what happened. You've been encrypted. All your attachments, all your work, all your data is basically under our lock and key. Do you want the key back? And most people would say, yeah, of course, I definitely want the key back. And they're going to say, cool, well, there's a catch to that. And the catch is you got to pay me some money. Now, a lot of times, especially back in the day, I would say early 2000s, even late 90s, if you paid ransom, you could hypothetically actually get your data back, and they wouldn't try to really throw you through the ringer. They were just trying to collect money. Nowadays, that's not necessarily the cost. So especially with ransomware insurance out there, this is becoming more and more of a daily occurrence and just throughout the entire market. So nowadays, they're going to be asking for Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, whatever that particular e-currency is. And they're not asking for gift cards, right? They're asking for large lump sums of money. Just like Sydney said at the very beginning, the average cost is about $87,000 for an average environment, right? And honestly, that's what I've seen personally, at least in the field. 87,000 is actually a pretty low number, especially nowadays. On average, at least what I'm seeing for ransomware costs, at least what they want initially is usually high millions, 1.2 and above. Obviously, this is not your typical SMB market. This is more enterprise, Fed-led, and above. But, they're asking for these very large amounts of money. And the reason that they're doing that now, where they couldn't have done that a year ago, is ransomware insurance. It's becoming more mainstream. All right, so let's actually kind of go to the next one here. So we talked about what it looks like to do ransomware, what it looks like to actually get deployed, but what is the actual plan of these unfortunate events? So a lot of times, and I've even personally seen this. So again, I used to be an MSP admin. I've seen some admins just completely give up, quit, walk out of the job because they know how much comes with a ransomware attack. And it's not, a 0-day attack. It's really cumbersome. It's, a lot of chaos. And then there's the other side of just, hey, we'll just pay the piper. We'll just pay them what they want. But again, that doesn't guarantee that your data is going to come back to you and they're not going to resell it or they're not going to retarget you again because obviously you paid the ransom. Now, what is the biggest thing that you can do? I can tell you one thing. Veeam's not going to give up, and Veeam's not going to tell you to pay the ransom. But what you can do is execute a plan. Now, having a plan in place, though, is just as important as executing the plan. So making sure that you have, admins. So when you're setting up these particular execution plans for when day zero hit, setting up your admin team and saying, hey, what servers need to come online first? Who needs access to the data first? And what is that last piece that we really need to pull it in to make everything come back together? There's a bunch of different pieces here. And one thing I would strongly advise over anything is really dedicating certain engineers to certain tasks. If you have a high transactional database, you have SQL, you have Oracle, you have, a lot of different things just going on that are very high transactional that are your money makers. Dedicate an engineer to those particular servers so they can go in, test it, make sure that the actual active full is still good. Make sure there's an integrity check, making sure that we are going through it and really poking and prodding around in these particular backups is really going to be mission critical before we pull it back online. All right, so we know a little bit about preparedness, right? But we want to really learn more. And some of these steps, honestly, are very, very simple. And I think anybody and everybody can do them. So number one, just keeping all software up to date. I think this is something that, anybody, Joe Smo or Sally from HR, can absolutely do. And a lot of times, this is something that, is a global policy. Hey, you sign into Active Directory, guess what? You just get updates and it'll reboot when it's needed because the admin set it up that way. Now, the other one, these 2 and 3 really go with each other very, very well. So performing a threat analysis or a pen test on your environment to find vulnerabilities. Now, this is something that I stress a lot because you don't know your true weakness until you set outside of your own barrier, your own environment, and you try to get in. Obviously, you can't use your passwords and things like that, but, act like you're a malicious insider or you're a malicious actor, and you need to go in and get into this particular environment and really go try to see where you can start to button up things. Because I can tell you what, I can almost guarantee in almost every environment, there's something that can be changed, tweaked, or manipulated to make it a better environment all the way around. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with training your staff on cybersecurity practices. And I'll speak from experience. So a lot of times you'll get an email quarterly, monthly, maybe even yearly, it's just a phishing scam from the IT department that says, hey, click on this link and you go on basically the naughty list, right? That says, hey, Sally clicked on the link, she needs a talking to, or Bob from resources was able to click on the link too, or and they make this group and then they kind of train their employees. One thing I would say is, and again, being that admin that was on site, that was actually in the field, sitting down with some of these employees and just taking the time, 10, 15 minutes of the admin's time or the engineer's time to really sit down and show them, hey, this is what it looks like. Be very suspicious and very have a second pair of eyes. Not necessarily somebody come and look at every email, But just be skeptical, right, of particular emails that don't look right, or they're a little out of place, or they're misspelled. Take it with a little grain of salt. Maybe don't click all the links. Maybe have it run through the antivirus that you guys have, or AV. So something kind of good to note there. The last 4 and 5, this is something that I will stress every day, all day, is backup every single day. Regardless of what's going on, all your information, all your data is very, very important. This is how you guys make money. And then the next biggest one is backing up all that information to a secure offline location, just like NewCloud, right? So making sure that we're going off to an offsite location that's not touchable by Active Directory, or physically located next to your site, something that's very, very good to have there. All right, so let's talk about 3-2-1, and then I'll get into the 3-2-1-1 strategy. So a lot of you guys, I would hope you guys have at least heard of 3-2-1, and I guess I want to say this really quickly is, let's just say that you guys aren't with Veeam, and you guys want to come to Veeam, and maybe you're with insert whatever backup product vendor you are with now, and you just ask them, hey, am I using 3-2-1 correctly, or have you guys heard of 3-2-1? And let's just say that engineer or that particular sales rep was like, yeah, we don't know what 3-2-1 is, or even the engineer. I would highly advise to run as fast as possible and not look back. 3-2-1 is one of these strategy rules that really is a global thing. It's not just a Veeam thing. It's not just a NewCloud or a Otava thing. It's honestly something that's a backup policy across the entire board that kind of should be really mentioned and talked about. So what is 3-2-1? So I'm going to break down 3-2-1 first, which is 3 different copies of your data. So in this particular case, what I like is DMDKs, which is active full of that particular data. Now, the next part of this is the 2, which is 2 different forms of media. Just to keep it simple, spinning disk and tape. So 2 logical different drives, right? So one's tape, one's spinning disk, and that's 2 different forms of media. And then having one offsite at NewCloud, or having one offsite at a different repository that's untouchable is also a really good one. Now, where that extra 1 comes into play is either an offline air gap, think of Iron Mountain, or an immutable target, think of NewCloud or Otava, where we can actually use that as an immutable target. Now, some of you guys may be used to air gapped, and maybe you guys are not too familiar with immutable. So let me kind of go over that at a very high level, because I do have a slide on it. But an immutable target realistically is a worm target, a write once, read many, that's up in object storage. So it's something that's not tangible physically to touch, and it can't be overwritten. But don't make a mistake that you can't pull down and restore from it, but it has an immutable flag that it just means that it can't be overwritten. Now, once we pair all that together, and we also pair that with data labs, which is testing to making sure that we're doing a heartbeat test, ping test, and application test, we're going to have 0 recovery errors. So that way, if we go back 3 months, 6 months, 6 years from now, and we've done these particular steps, we know when we go back to restore, we're not going to have any issues. So good stuff there. Now, again, this is more talking about just offline, immutable, and air gap, different repositories, and how we can do some of these different things. And a lot of you guys are used to tape, right? Something completely offline that, is all worm, write once, read many. Now, another good one that I really like is replicated virtual machines. Again, this is more infrastructure as a service or disaster recovery as a service. But this is a powered off instance of a virtual machine. In most cases, either Hyper-V or VMware, just to kind of depending on the hardware that sits at the DC or the data center. This is basically an offline version of that particular production virtual machine that's just waiting to be powered on in the time of a crisis. Insert, fire, flood, whatever may be happening, ISP down, things like that. Of course, even ransomware, of course. And then primary storage snapshots. And when I think of primary storage snapshots, I really think of like NetApp and a lot of these bigger arrays that have snapshot technology that they make them redundant. That's all fine and dandy, and I think that's a really good way to make sure that we have a lot of immutability there, really. And then being Cloud Connect, of course. So Cloud Connect has a built-in functionality, which is called insider protection. It's a mechanism that really blocks a malicious insider and ransomware, any type of exploit. And let me kind of explain that a little more. So if you are going to new cloud, or you're going to Ottawa, right, and you have your local prod data center or your local prod server, domain controller, SQL server got infected by ransomware, and that exploit was able to get in and let's just say they were actually able to get into the backup server because you didn't set up policies right, you didn't set up MFA, you didn't do multi-factor authentication, and the security protocols were kind of weak, right? And they got in. So they went to your Veeam backup and replication server and just deleted the entire array. So what actually happens is it's going to look like to the hacker or that malicious insider that it was actually successful, but realistically it really wasn't. And I have a slide that will talk about it more, but at the end of the day, the data still resides at new cloud and just awaiting for restore at that point. Rotating drives, I think this is a really good one. Obviously, just rotating media. So the more you can kind of get data diversified and more spread out geographically, the better. Linux immutable, which is a mutable flag that Veeam has that we can make it a Linux repository completely immutable on-prem, and then immutable backups in the cloud, obviously, of course, with new cloud and Ottawa, and then, of course, if you wanted to go off to more of a public cloud setting, AWS. All right, so hardened Linux repository or hardened repository, why is it, what is it, and how does it work? So what is it? It's basically a Linux repository that sits locally on-prem, and what it does is it sets an immutable flag on this particular data, right? So maybe a VMDK, which is an active pull, and we say, hey, I want this immutable flag to be set for 30 days, 60 days, right? So during that particular time, no data can be overwritten. After that particular immutable flag has been lifted, the new data that meets in that particular 30, 60, 90 days, whatever that retention period is, fills in that particular old void, allowing for the most current data to still be locked down with an immutable flag, and that oldest data is now able to be deleted or manipulated at that point in time. So something to kind of think about. All right, so insider protection. I was talking about a little bit about this just a second ago, and I want to move your eyes to that, not the blue box where it says set quota, but it's actually the gray box that says new tenant, and at the bottom it says keep backup files for 14 days. This is insider protection. So this is a little checkbox on the MSP side or on the new cloud side that basically can protect against insider hacks, and really what it does at the end of the day is preserve all the deleted backup files for a set number of days. So that way, even if something happens, let's just say Friday, you're not in the office Saturday, you're not in the office Sunday, and you come in Monday, you're still going to be protected because you have that 14-day retention policy sitting on the new cloud side. All right, so we talked a lot about the verticals. We talked a lot about how we can start to protect and kind of set up some of the best practices. But let's actually kind of talk about some protection tips. And this is all from the Veeam support side. Now let's talk about, we've already talked about the 3-2-1, so I'm not going to drill that too much more, but I do want to talk about encryption. What we use here internally at Veeam is AES 256-bit. So that's our encryption algorithm, and we're end-to-end encrypted. So if you're landing locally, whether that's a NAS, if shares, fiber channel LUN, C drive, D drive, E drive, really doesn't matter. Your first initial landing zone is fully encrypted. Same thing with going off to new cloud. They're going to be fully encrypted as well. So from end-to-end encryption. Now, we do have an encryption password that we do use, and that's to send the data over the wire to more of a public cloud setting, which you don't necessarily have to have with new cloud. One of the biggest things that I want to mention here is making sure that you don't lose your encryption password. There's no one out there that can help you if you lose your encryption password. Just very simply. So I just want to note that one more time. Encryption passwords are very crazy and usually very complex. I'm not saying it has to be 52, characters with a whole bunch of hashes and stuff, but most encryption passwords are pretty complex, and that's for good reasons, right? Now, my personal thing, what I do when I set up an encryption job or when I'm setting up encryption anyway, is what I do is I take that password, I literally write it on a piece of paper, and I take two pieces of paper. I take one copy, I put it in my safe at home, and one into a lockbox or somewhere that actually for that particular location itself. The biggest reason is because there's no one going to be able to help you if you don't have the decryption password to help yourself. And then that kind of leads me into separation of accounts and admin versus domain. I always like to kind of put this out there. Again, I used to be an admin, so I really understand this at a fully global level here. Is admins absolutely need admin level privileges to do most of their jobs. However, I would say that if an admin needs full admin privileges throughout the entire day, that's kind of crazy. Most of the time, they only need it to go in and change particular AD or change a SQL server or go fix a table in SQL or something like that. And a lot of that time, what I say is absolutely still let your admins have admin accounts, but still treat them and still have them as a regular domain account. So just like a regular end user would have, very stripped down permissions, not access to the full domain. So that way they use their domain admin accounts for the admin side, and then they log off of that one and only log in as a regular user that has a very limited security group. And another big thing is making sure that the Veeam backup and replication server isn't on the domain controller. And the most separation that we can get, really setting up those particular boundaries. And that kind of leads me into the next one here, which is again, just more really good information around Veeam support. So actually, let me go back one. I think it went over. Yep. So MFA, this is multi-factor authentication, used whenever possible. I mean, I personally use multi-factor authentication all the time, in and out of work, even for, and I sound kind of weird, I even have to have it for my home Wi-Fi because I really want to make sure that my network is very stringent and very secure. It's just something I like to do. And again, MFA is one of those easy things that can just be that much more safe from ransomware or some type of exploit. Takes out of the library, making sure you do maintenance on your library, of course, and use Worm, Write Once, Read Many. And prioritize, knowing what's a resource first. So I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier about that execution plan, right? Is really making sure that, hey, if something day zero happens today, what is our task? What is my task? What is that engineer's task? Because I can tell you right now, just from pure experience, when ransomware hits, and just like Sydney said, it's not going away anytime soon. It's not, it's kind of like, I kind of like to put it like termites. If you own a house, nobody wants termites, but unfortunately, they always come. You can do a lot of prevention, and that's really the key. Prevention and mitigation is really the key to that. If you can keep that particular, worm or that particular ransomware out of that environment for that much longer, you can set up that many more brick walls for them to try to crawl through before you can stop it at the, firewall level, switch level, or maybe just AV level, or just full-blown block. Who knows what's actually going on there. All right, so testing resource. I could literally spend the next 20 to 40 minutes just talking about testing. I'm not going to bore you guys with that, but these two really do go hand in hand. So a ready DR console and testing your backup. So it's extremely, extremely important to have a backup itself, right? So using Veeam to back it up. But just as important to have that backup is to test the backup. And a lot of people will go, well, why is it so important to test the backup? And really, it's a very simplistic answer. If you don't test the backup, you don't really know if it's good. You don't know if there was an array failure. You don't know if there was corruption in the backup file. But if you do test it, you know that if you go to restore it 3, 6 months, 6 years from now, since you did test it, has been vetted, and it's going to be good to go. And having a DR site, these kind of go, again, hand in hand here. Having a DR site ready to go, or even having the mindset of what happens if I get my back thrown against the wall, what am I going to do, what are my next steps? And having that DR site absolutely is one of those things that can definitely benefit you guys. So, all right, so stronger passwords, I can kind of, again, this is something that I think that speaks volumes. Windows credentials, Linux credentials, SMB shares, really just making sure that they're more of not an easy password, nothing super easy to get. I used to see a lot. And I bet you there's somebody in this audience today that either has or hasn't used their last name, first name, street address, or the crossroads of their particular building as a password. And I can tell you, when I used to do pen testing, that was the very first couple things I would do, is really making sure that, hey, what's the crossroads? Cool. I'm going to Google it, and I'm going to see what I can kind of do from the outside in. And a lot of times, there was always somebody in that organization that wasn't thinking about security, and that's what really came up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about mixed repositories. So mixed repositories, whether you're landing in Linux or you're landing in Windows, very great choices. In this particular case, I'm going to choose Linux over Windows just because we have that immutable hardened repository that we can use. All right, so ransomware and remediation and recovery. So let's kind of talk about this at a high level here. So again, what are they going to ask you to do? They're going to ask you to pay the ransom, right? They're going to say Bitcoin, Ethereum, insert whatever cryptocurrency that's out there and popular that they can use and get some value out of, right? And then that restoring compromised data, right? So that's also another thing that we really don't want to do, and that's where we can get that sure backup, testing it in data labs, making sure that we're good to go. And then contacting your crime prevention fraud team. Now, a lot of times, especially nowadays, this is becoming, hey, I need to contact my insurance. And why am I contacting my insurance? Because I have ransomware insurance, and I need to let them know so that way they can do an investigation. They can send out an auditor, see where we can, improve our steps, improve, a lot of different our protocols, so that way maybe we can either get our data back if you had it protected right using 3211 or 321 hypothetically, or am I completely lost? Is the data gone because I didn't have a backup? I wasn't testing it. Nothing was offsite, right? There's a couple of different things we could use here. So this is a big one. I think a lot of people will be very used to this. And let me kind of just go around the horn here. So this big circle, I would assume that most of you guys out there have seen this or heard of this. This is NIST. So identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So what is our strategy for this? And this really comes to data tagging, data locality, and business use. So using Veeam 1. So Veeam 1 is our eyes and ears to these environments. And then we can use some data locality and data tagging to make sure that we know exactly what particular data sets could possibly be vulnerable. Next is protecting that particular data using 32110 rule, also sure backup, and data labs. Again, really making sure that we're testing it. We're making sure that we have it in multiple different places, multiple different medias, and those offsite, offline, immutable, or completely tape-driven repositories. And how are we going to detect that? We're going to detect that through Veeam 1. So we're going to have monitors, we're going to have alerts, we're going to have data integration API, right? So we can scan and really digest that data. Now, how are we going to respond to that? We're going to respond to that by, really dynamic documentation. So again, really knowing exactly what happens when we do need to respond. Orchestration of DR. So we need to know, hey, we need to fail these VMs over now. We need to fail these VMs over last. And of course, always, and I'll note this, I can tell you during the orchestration part, you're always going to have end users screaming that they need their data, and it always happens. But I can tell you what, if you have a dynamic documentation, it's going to make that process that much faster and that much more streamlined. And also one thing I guess I should also know, just doing that, every half year, every quarter, of course, is better. But, just throwing your IT team through that particular scenario, I think is huge. And that's where we can really land back at recovering. We're using secure restore. We're using instant labs. We're using data labs. It's really making sure that we're using this to full capabilities. All right, so what is secure restore? And this is something that I kind of touched on just a little bit here, which is, all right, so again, so the backup happens, file downloads and sits for a stagnant file system. Let's just call it an AS. That exploit is leveraged and the file itself is downloaded. And let's just say, backup happens, so day 0. So the attack is now launched. The AV is now aware. The signature now builds it, AV awareness, and then it does a clean restore. Now, what are we really doing at the end? We're isolating the environment to form a test of AV, and really scan against the backups, really making sure that we're good to go. And that's exactly what a secure resource is doing. Is one, we're isolating it, and if let's just say that we did find ransomware, so the AV found ransomware, Veeam's going to say, hey, do you want to proceed? We have a couple different options. Do you want to proceed with your backup? And I can tell you that Veeam's going to throw a fit if you try to do that, because it's going to say, hey, stupid, that's not what you should do. Or are you going to be able to just put that to an isolated environment, more of a dev or a sandbox environment, to really see maybe how far spread that is? Because there's a lot of different options, and it really kind of depends on what your guys' plan is for execution. Again, so let's go over some Veeam ransomware resiliency. Education for users and admins. Again, this is something that I will scream and preach all day long, just because I think it is so valuable. Just making sure that your end users or admins on the same page. Making sure that your backup and recovery implementation is done correctly. I think that is also a very big mission critical thing. I can't tell you the amount of times that everybody speaks volumes. Everybody wants the best security. Everybody wants the best backup. But when it comes to implementation, I think there's a big boundary there. Sometimes you feel like you're set up in the best ways, and unfortunately you're not. And then lastly is having that remediation plan or that execution plan for when this particular exploits, ransomware, insert whatever virus comes your way. That you have you have a set of protocols in place, and yes, it's going to be hectic. Yes, everybody's going to be a little nervous and on pins and needles, but we can make it that much more better if we have that remediation plan. All right, so SOBR. How does SOBR work, and what is SOBR? So SOBR is a scale-out backup repository. Basically what it does is it breaks it into different tiers. So when we're sending data to most of the time either new cloud or public cloud in general, this is how we get the data from the on-prem physical servers to the cloud. So we have to land on the performance tier first. So again, think of that performance tier as a local spinning disk target, whether it's a NAS, a dedupe appliance, a hardened Linux repository, or even capacity tier, right? So capacity tier, obviously, of course, could be like new cloud or Otava, or any one of the 5,000-pound gorillas out there, right? So we have Amazon or Azure, Google, all those guys. And then there's this last one, which is V11 featured, which is archive tier. Archive tier, of course, allows for grandfather, father, son of that data. And also something to note here is new cloud is running on version 11. So if you do need to send your data to one of these, colder storages, you could absolutely do so. Just something to kind of note there. Cool deal. Let's talk about some endpoints and non-virtualized systems. So there's the Veeam agent for Linux. So if you need to make sure that you have any Linux workloads backed up, this is how you do so. And same thing for Windows. Windows is the same thing. So if you need to have a Windows, and the last one is, or actually there should be another one in here for Mac, but if you have one for Mac as well, so Windows, Linux, and Mac, those are the particular agents that we have. So if you have any actual physical servers or workstations, that's where we can really put those guys to work and really make them start to do the backups there. Now, one thing I guess I'll lastly say is our 24/7 real-time monitoring. This is Veeam 1. I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Veeam 1 basically has 200 present alarms, and you can configure them in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different. There's a ransomware alarm that will say, hey, we've had a whole bunch of churn in data. We haven't seen this much churn. I would really highly advise to go look at it. And then, what we are doing is we're seeing RPOs and SLAs and really a very granular side of the business for data stores and latency. And really this is the eyes and ears for a lot of admins, because, they can't monitor these environments 24/7 as well as an application does, because these guys hook right into the hypervisor and sees whatever the hypervisor sees. So, all right, so at this point, I'm going to pass it back to one of our Platinum BCSP partners, Sydney, and thanks for everybody who let me ramble for a while. So,
thanks, Michael. All right. So the key takeaway here is that New Cloud works very closely with Veeam to offer you total ransomware protection. And we do this by combining Veeam software with our ultra-low latency network of cloud hubs. which allows you to create a secure, encrypted, and automated backup of your data while getting them off-site quickly and then pulling them back when you need it. And with replication, you can also get really granular, as Michael mentioned. You can restore isolated files to make sure that you're not restoring compromised files as well. And you can also recover your data in a way that you're not reinfecting your environment with ransomware. So I want to take a step back here very quickly and give you some context as to who NewCloud is for those of you who might be unfamiliar with us. So NewCloud is a cloud service provider. We have been in business since 1988. Obviously, we weren't into cloud back then or called NewCloud. That would have been some tremendous foresight on our part. But our background is actually in networking, and we've evolved several times over the years to adjust our offerings according to the changes in technology. And we've amassed over 1,000 customers in the US and Europe as such. And we are actually a platinum partner with Veeam. We're one of the first initial launch partners for Veeam Cloud Connect, and we've built a reputation for quality within our industry. And our SLA and our customer satisfaction rating do a really good job of exemplifying that. And we're just acquired by Ottava in July of 2021, so we are now known as NewCloud and Ottava Company. This is a breakdown of NewCloud's nationwide ultra-low latency network. The network is designed and built for backup and disaster recovery. And when we talk about backup and disaster recovery, it's important to have your data far enough away from your main site so that it won't be affected by the same natural disaster, but also close enough so that it's usable when you actually need to stand up the VMs. And we actually control the bandwidth and the latency between these two locations. Excuse me here. Between these locations, so that we ensure that our customers' data is always usable. And so if your company is actually hit by ransomware, this means that we can get your data and backups to you quickly, which limits or eliminates downtime for you. And then I previewed this slide here for you, but we work hand in glove with Veeam to bring our customers best-in-breed solutions. And so we have a variety of Veeam offerings that we support, and our engineers are actually Veeam certified as well, and we work to implement the technology with our customers very fast. We offer the full suite of Veeam backup and disaster recovery services, everything from Cloud Connect backup to backup for laptops as well. So really anything Veeam related that you guys are looking for, NewCloud is able to accomplish. So at NewCloud, we believe that great technology is powered by great people. And we're always being asked what sets us apart from the likes of Amazon and Microsoft. And our answer is the same. We believe in personalized service. We're not a 1-800 number. And we know that our customers aren't cookie cutters, so we don't try to make them cookie cutter. Our customers can rest assured that we have top engineers available to them 24/7 to help. We work closely with our customers to ensure we develop solutions that address their core business needs. And we implement the solutions using our best-in-breed technology partners at an affordable rate. So the bottom line is that we believe in taking care of our customers. I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. I know you've learned a lot about ransomware preparedness and recovery. The most important thing to remember is that you're not exempt from an attack. Your company will face something like this in the near future, but the key is to proactively prepare. This can make all of the difference. So what's next? Well, you've heard from NewCloud, you've heard from Veeam, and right now we'd love to hear from you. So we want to talk to you about your unique business needs and understand how we can help. We also have a free trial available for those of you who are interested in kicking the tires and testing out the features of our backup service. And you can always reach out to Michael or myself with any questions that you might have after this webinar. Our contact information is here. But right now I want to turn it over to the question feature. We did have a few questions come through the chat. Take a moment, go ahead and ask some more questions. But the first one that's come through is, does NewCloud offer immutable storage? The answer is yes. We do offer immutable storage, immutable backups with Veeam V11, and we're happy to do that for you. The next question that we have here, how are techs reached after hours? Is it a direct connection or a callback? After hours kind of depends on what your support tier is. We do have a a call. We have an answering service that answers after hours, and then it does escalate accordingly. But that can kind of be identified in your contract how you would like to engage with us if you do need after-hours support. It's a great question. The next one that's come through here, does NewCloud offer a free trial? Yes, we do. We offer up to 20 terabytes for 30 days in a trial environment for backup. It's a really great way to kind of test the waters with backup and make sure that it's going to work for your environment. The next question that we have here is, what happens if you do not have an IT vendor or in-house IT support? Well, we offer managed services. So if you need a managed backup or a managed disaster recovery solution, NewCloud can help in that way. I mean, we're a full services IT shop. We work very closely with our customers to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them through any cloud transition and process. So I would just reach out directly to kind of see how we can help address your specific needs. The next question is, how is the solution priced out? Our pricing is based on a per gigabyte per month pricing value. Each individual, there's different ways to kind of address pricing depending on the consumption models of how many terabytes that you invest in and what your yearly contract is. So we can take that on a individual basis as well. And then how fast can I spin up a cloud environment with NewCloud? That is really dependent upon the size of your data set. And if you're already using Cloud Connect or Veeam, or if not, but typically we can spin anything up in 24 hours if all goes according to plan. 24 hours or less, I should say. If we need to get you into Veeam and start up with that, it might take a little longer. And if your data set is a little bit larger, it might take a little longer as well, but it can be very quick. And then what sort of resources will I require on site to manage the Cloud Connect transition upkeep? Michael, can you handle that one?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So what kind of maintenance is really required? So let's just say you are sending data to NewCloud. All it is a job that sends over. So there's really no maintenance, I would say, really required. It's just set it, forget it, and watch the data ship off to NewCloud's data center.
Great. All right. It looks like those are all the questions that have come through. So again, I'll put our contact information here up on the screen. If anything comes up after we close out the webinar, please do feel free to reach out to Michael or myself. We'll be happy to answer any of your questions. And if you would like to set up an individual conversation to talk about your specific use case, you can obviously reach out to me and we'll get that set up as well. But thank you so much for joining the webinar today, and we look forward to hearing from you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.